Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're embarking on a journey into the life of a figure whose genius quite literally opened up the cosmos for us, but who also faced immense challenges for daring to look and think differently.
Yeah, it's quite a story.
Imagine for a moment a world where the very structure of the universe was a settled, unquestionable truth. One cemented by centuries of tradition and interpretation.
Right. Pretty much set in stone.
And then one individual comes along, points a relatively simple tube at the sky, and fundamentally reshapes everything we thought we knew.
It's more than just a historical account. It's truly a story of intellectual courage, a pivotal moment in human history when empirical observation began to, well, challenge entrenched dogma.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to unpack the incredible insights from a stack of sources, articles, research, and our own notes to give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed about one of history's most pivotal scientific figures, Galileo. We're going to extract those crucial nuggets of knowledge, offer some surprising facts, and hopefully spark a few aha moments without ever overwhelming you with information overload.
And Galileo isn't merely a figure confined to dusty textbooks, is he? His narrative is central to humanity's ongoing journey to understand the universe and our place within it.
Definitely.
It's about more than just scientific discovery. It's a powerful testament to the enduring human spirit of curiosity, the relentless pursuit of truth, and, frankly, the sheer courage required to stand by one's convictions against formidable odds.
So, to truly appreciate the giant Galileo became, we really have to rewind to his earliest days. What was the crucible of his youth like? Where did this extraordinary mind begin its journey?
Well, Galilei entered the world on February 15, 1564, in the picturesque city of Pisa, which was then part of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, Italy.
Okay.
He was the eldest of 7 children, so you can imagine the lively chaos of that household.
Wow, 7. Busy house.
Yeah. His father, Vincenzo Galilei, was a truly fascinating character in his own right. A highly skilled musician, composer, and actually a groundbreaking music theorist.
Music theorist, that's interesting.
And his mother, Giulia Ammannati, managed the household. Pretty typical for women of that era.
That's a profound connection to make the musical background. How profoundly do you think Vincenzo's unique profession, steeped in the mathematical underpinnings of sound, shaped Galileo's own analytical mind from such a young age?
I think it's an often overlooked influence, but a critical one. Vincenzo wasn't just a performer, he was an experimentalist and a theoretician.
Really?
Oh yeah, he famously challenged established musical traditions, particularly the rigid Pythagorean ratios that had dominated music theory for centuries.
Wow.
Instead, he conducted experiments with vibrating strings, meticulously measuring their lengths and tensions to understand why certain harmonies sounded pleasant and others, well, dissonant.
So, hands-on experiments with music.
Exactly. He was one of the first to apply a truly empirical, almost scientific approach to music. This analytical rigor, this insistence on observation and measurement over pure theory or tradition, must have permeated their home and certainly influenced young Galileo, even if unconsciously.
Huh.
He learned early on that the world's most beautiful phenomena, like music, could be understood through mathematics and experimentation.
It makes perfect sense. The son of a man who mathematically dissected sound gravitated towards understanding the mathematical underpinnings of the universe. And ironically, his father initially wanted him to study medicine at the University of Pisa.
Right, the more practical path, supposedly.
What was the turning point that steered him away from healing bodies and towards exploring the cosmos?
It's a classic tale, really, of a nascent genius finding his true calling. Galileo did enroll in medicine at Pisa in 1581, primarily due to his father's hopes for a more, shall we say, financially stable career for his eldest son. But it was there, almost by accident, that he encountered mathematics. Legend has it, he overheard a geometry lecture and was just instantly captivated.
Just like that?
Pretty much. He began attending these lectures, absorbing the concepts with astonishing speed and a natural aptitude. This wasn't just a casual interest. It was an undeniable, all-consuming passion that began to overshadow his medical studies entirely.
So a passion ignited, but then he faced a significant setback. He had to leave Pisa University in 1585 due to financial difficulties. This wasn't a choice, but a necessity.
Yeah, money troubles hit the family.
But, and this is crucial, he didn't just give up on his intellectual pursuits, did he? What did this period of self-study entail, and how did it shape his scientific direction?
No, he definitely didn't give up. This period, from 1585 to 1589, was actually formative. It wasn't a pause, but an intense phase of independent intellectual development.
Right.
Without the formal structure of the university, Galileo just immersed himself in self-study, devouring classical texts. He was particularly deeply impacted by the works of Archimedes.
Ah, Archimedes.
Yeah, the ancient Greek mathematician, physicist, and engineer. Archimedes' rigorous, quantitative approach to mechanics and hydrostatics really resonated deeply with Galileo.
So that focus on math and measurement again?
Exactly. Archimedes' method of deriving principles from observable phenomena and then proving them mathematically became a kind of blueprint for Galileo's own scientific approach. This influence propelled his focus specifically into mechanics and theoretical mathematics, shifting his trajectory irrevocably from medicine.
So he essentially forged his own path, becoming a self-taught master in the very fields that would define his legacy. And his persistence paid off, didn't it?
It absolutely did. His burgeoning reputation as a brilliant, if maybe a bit unconventional mathematician, grew through his independent studies and some early treatises he wrote.
Okay.
This led to his appointment as professor of mathematics back at the University of Pisa in 1589. Quite an achievement, considering he'd left earlier without a degree.
Yeah, that's amazing.
This return to academia wasn't just a job. It laid the direct groundwork for his truly groundbreaking scientific career, providing him with a platform and, resources to begin his most significant inquiries.
And what a career it became. His contributions were absolutely groundbreaking across physics, astronomy, and mathematics. He wasn't just incrementally adding to existing knowledge.
Yeah, no.
He was actively challenging the prevailing Aristotelian worldview and advocating for the then radical Copernican system, effectively paving the way for modern science as we know it.
What's truly revolutionary about Galileo's approach is that his work wasn't siloed. His insights in one field often fed into another, creating this powerful ripple effect.
Interesting.
He was, in essence, synthesizing observation, experimentation, and mathematical reasoning in a way that truly defined the emerging scientific method. He was a genuine polymath, but I think for many people, it's his work with the telescope that first captures the imagination.
Oh, definitely. Galileo and the telescope are almost synonymous, yet there's a crucial distinction to be made about his role, isn't there? What was his true contribution to this revolutionary instrument, and how did he stumble upon its potential?
That's a crucial point that often gets muddled. Galileo did not invent the telescope.
Right. Important clarification.
That credit typically goes to Hans Lippershey, a Dutch spectacle maker who applied for a patent for a device for seeing at a distance back in 1608.
Lippershey.
News of this invention, though it was pretty rudimentary, quickly spread across Europe in 1609. Galileo, hearing only vague descriptions of this new Dutch perspective glass, immediately grasped its profound potential, not just as a novelty, but as a scientific instrument. So he set about building his own, basically from scratch, based on the scientific principle, not just trying to copy a design he hadn't even seen.
So it was less about invention and more about revolutionary application and, well, refinement. How much did he improve upon that basic Dutch design, and what challenges did he face in doing so?
His improvements were truly astonishing. The initial Dutch telescopes offered maybe 3x magnification.
Just 3 times.
Yeah, pretty weak. Within months, though, through painstaking trial and error grinding and polishing his own lenses by hand, Galileo developed telescopes that boasted 20x, then even 30x magnification.
Wow, from 3x to 30x, that's a huge leap.
It was a qualitative transformation. Imagine the dedication, the endless hours spent meticulously shaping glass, experimenting with curvatures, battling imperfections, all to achieve unprecedented clarity.
This has been incredibly frustrating sometimes.
Oh, I'm sure. But this allowed for an incredibly detailed observation of the night sky, transforming it from a mere collection of twinkling lights into a vibrant, dynamic landscape of new discoveries.
And armed with this new power of sight, what were the first game-changing discoveries Galileo made that truly began to unravel the established cosmic order?
Well, the year 1610 was pivotal. Galileo turned his improved telescope toward Jupiter, and what he saw there was nothing short of a cosmic paradigm shift.
Jupiter, okay, what did he see?
He observed 4 distinct, tiny stars orbiting Jupiter, changing their positions night after night in a regular, predictable pattern. These were, of course, the 4 largest moons of Jupiter.
The Galilean moons.
Exactly. Now famously known as the Galilean moons, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto.
And why was that discovery such a monumental aha moment? not just for Galileo, but for the entire scientific world.
Its significance cannot be overstated. For centuries, the prevailing Aristotelian and Ptolemaic geocentric model held that everything in the heavens revolved around a stationary Earth.
Earth was the center of everything.
Right. The Earth was the sole center of all celestial motion. But Galileo's observation of Jupiter's moons provided undeniable visual proof that there was another center of rotation in the universe.
Huh.
If moons could orbit Jupiter, then Earth was clearly not unique in having celestial bodies revolve around it. This shattered the fundamental premise of the geocentric worldview
Right out the window.
and provided powerful, direct observational evidence supporting the Copernican sun-centered or heliocentric model. It was the first tangible proof that not everything revolved around Earth.
And his observations didn't stop with Jupiter, did they? He then turned his improved telescope towards our closest celestial neighbor, the Moon. What did he observe there, and how did it further disrupt established beliefs?
His lunar observations were equally disruptive. The prevailing Aristotelian view held that celestial bodies were perfect, immutable, crystalline spheres, completely distinct from the imperfect Earth.
Smooth, perfect balls of light, basically.
Pretty much. But when Galileo looked at the moon, he didn't see a smooth, flawless orb. Instead, he saw a landscape covered in mountains, craters, and valleys, features strikingly similar to those found on Earth.
Wow.
He even estimated the heights of lunar mountains by observing the shadows they cast. Really quite clever.
So he was implying that the Moon wasn't some ethereal, perfect entity, but a rocky world, much like our own.
Precisely. This observation directly challenged the long-held dogma of celestial perfection and the fundamental distinction between the terrestrial and the celestial realms.
Breaking down that barrier.
Exactly. It suggested that the moon, and by extension other heavenly bodies, were material, imperfect worlds sharing a physical nature with Earth. This was a radical idea that chipped away at the perceived uniqueness and centrality of Earth and the cosmos.
And his curiosity was insatiable, wasn't it? What other celestial bodies did his improved telescope reveal secrets about?
His gaze then fell upon Venus. He meticulously observed that Venus exhibited a full range of phases,
Yeah.
just like our moon, from a thin crescent to a gibbous, nearly full disk.
Phases of Venus.
Yeah.
Like the Moon. Okay. And why was that observation so crucial in the debate between the geocentric and heliocentric models?
This was yet another powerful piece of empirical evidence for the Copernican model. See, in the geocentric Ptolemaic system, Venus was believed to orbit Earth on an epicycle, always remaining between the Earth and the Sun. If that were true, Venus would always appear as a crescent, or at most, maybe half illuminated from our perspective. It could never show a full face.
Ah, okay, I see.
However, if Venus orbited the Sun, as Copernicus proposed, then it would pass through a complete cycle of phases, including a nearly full phase when it was on the opposite side of the Sun from Earth.
Makes sense.
Galileo's observation of a full range of Venusian phases, including the gibbous and nearly full, unequivocally supported the heliocentric model. It was, a visual smoking gun.
Hard to argue with seeing it. And finally, he even dared to point his telescope at the Sun itself, observing what we now know as sunspots. What did this tell him? And how did it further challenge the notion of celestial perfection?
Observing sunspots was definitely a bold move, and it came with personal cost, as looking directly at the Sun eventually damaged his eyesight quite severely.
Ouch. Yeah, don't try that at home.
Definitely not. But these observations were profoundly significant. The very existence of spots, imperfections, on the Sun contradicted the idea of perfect, unchanging celestial bodies.
Another crack in the old model.
And more importantly, Galileo observed that these spots moved across the Sun's surface in a regular pattern, indicating that the Sun itself rotated on its own axis.
The Sun spins.
Yeah. This contributed to a more dynamic, less static understanding of the cosmos, where even the central star was not a fixed, pristine entity, but a rotating, changing body.
All these incredible telescopic observations described with such precision and clarity were meticulously detailed in his groundbreaking work, Sidereus Nuncius, or Starry Messenger, published in 1610. What was its immediate impact, and how did Galileo's writing style contribute to its sensational reception?
The impact of Sidereus Nuncius was nothing short of explosive. It caused an absolute sensation across Europe, making Galileo one of the most famous and celebrated scientists almost overnight.
Wow, instant celebrity scientists.
Pretty much. Suddenly, people could read about these astonishing discoveries, and importantly, they could even verify them with their own newly acquired telescopes, which were starting to appear.
Right, others could check his work.
Exactly. What truly distinguished the book, beyond its incredible content, was Galileo's clear, elegant, and accessible writing style. Unlike many academic treatises of the time, which were often written in dense Latin and laden with obscure jargon,
Yeah, impenetrable stuff.
right? Galileo wrote with an almost journalistic flair. He describes his observations with vivid detail, making complex scientific ideas understandable and exciting to a much wider audience, including non-specialists and even influential figures in courts, and crucially, the church.
That accessibility seems key.
It was revolutionary in itself, helping to democratize scientific knowledge.
It's incredible how his observations reshaped our view of the heavens. But Galileo wasn't just an astronomer. His mind also delved into the fundamental forces right here on Earth, laying groundwork that would profoundly influence even Isaac Newton later on. How did his work on physics stack up against his celestial discoveries?
Oh, his contributions to physics are arguably just as foundational, if not maybe even more so, than his astronomical ones. He truly was an architect of modern science because he systematically challenged the long-dominant Aristotelian physics that had dictated understanding of motion for nearly 2 millennia.
Right, Aristotle was the authority.
For sure. Take, for instance, his law of falling bodies. He demonstrated that, contrary to Aristotle's belief, objects fall at the same rate regardless of their weight, assuming, of course, you can ignore air resistance or are in a vacuum.
And this is where that iconic, though perhaps embellished, anecdote comes in, isn't it? The legend of him dropping different weighted balls from the Leaning Tower of Pisa to test this very idea.
The Leaning Tower of Pisa experiment. It's one of those vivid images that just captures the spirit of scientific inquiry, right?
Totally.
While the exact historical veracity of Galileo physically dropping objects from the tower is debated by historians, he more likely used inclined planes quite a bit to slow down the motion and make it measurable.
Ah, inclined planes.
Right.
Smart.
Yeah, really ingenious. But the core idea is absolutely sound, and the legend perfectly encapsulates his experimental approach. Aristotle claimed heavier objects fall faster in proportion to their weight. Galileo, through careful observation and these clever experiments, showed this was just plain false.
How did he actually do it then, mostly with the inclined planes?
Yes, primarily. He used these smooth, grooved, inclined planes, which allowed him to essentially dilute gravity, slowing down the acceleration of objects, so that he could accurately measure the time it took for balls of different weights to roll down.
Clever.
Right.
What did he use for timing?
He would often use a water clock, basically measuring the weight of water that flowed out during the experiment, or even his own pulse sometimes. He'd release bronze balls of varying masses down these grooves, and what he found repeatedly was that regardless of their weight, the balls always reached the bottom in the same amount of time, or rather, their acceleration was the same.
Wow, same acceleration for everything.
This was a truly revolutionary insight. The acceleration due to gravity is constant for all objects near the Earth's surface, a massive step forward and a direct refutation of centuries of accepted wisdom.
And then there's the principle of inertia, a concept so fundamental to physics now that we almost take it for granted. How did he arrive at this, and why was it so revolutionary at the time?
This concept was truly transformative because it overturned centuries of Aristotelian physics, which held that objects naturally just came to rest.
Yeah, things just stop unless you keep pushing them, right? That was the old idea.
Exactly. Aristotle believed that a continuous force was required to keep an object in motion, and that if left alone, it would naturally cease moving and return to a state of rest. Galileo, through thought experiments and observation, proposed the radical idea that an object in motion will continue in that motion at a constant velocity unless acted upon by an external force, like friction or air resistance.
So things want to keep going.
In essence, yes. He understood that a force is needed only to change an object's motion to start it, stop it, or alter its direction, not simply to maintain it at a constant speed in a straight line.
So he shifted the entire framework of understanding motion. It wasn't about why things keep going, but why they stop or change.
Precisely. This insight, which he developed without the benefit of, perfectly friction-free environments, formed the absolute conceptual basis for Isaac Newton's first law of motion, often called the law of inertia.
Newton built on it.
Directly. It's a cornerstone of classical mechanics, and really of all physics, providing a foundational understanding of how objects behave in the absence of net external forces.
His work on pendulum motion also had far-reaching implications, extending beyond theory into incredibly practical applications, didn't it?
Indeed. story goes, while attending a church service, Galileo reputedly observed a swinging chandelier.
The famous chandelier story.
That's the one. He noticed that regardless of how wide its amplitude, the time it took for one complete swing, its period seemed to remain constant. He supposedly timed it against his own pulse.
Cool.
Through further experimentation using simple pendulums, he discovered that the period of a pendulum's swing depends primarily on the length of its string, not significantly on the weight of the bob or, for small angles, the amplitude of the swing.
So the length is the key thing.
Yes, this fundamental discovery, known as isochronism, meaning same time, led directly to the conceptual development of much more accurate clocks.
It's incredible to think how a seemingly simple observation could have such a profound ripple effect.
Well, the precision offered by a pendulum for time measurement was revolutionary. Before this, clocks were notoriously inaccurate, maybe losing or gaining many minutes a day.
Pretty useless for anything precise then.
Right. Galileo's work provided the scientific basis for the pendulum clock, which would later be perfected by Christian Huygens. This invention went on to revolutionize timekeeping, enabling huge advancements in navigation, astronomy, and countless other fields that rely on precise timing. It demonstrates how a foundational scientific insight can have immediate, world-changing practical applications.
And speaking of foundational changes, Galileo is wisely considered a trailblazer of the modern scientific method itself. What was his approach, really, and how did it differ from the accepted intellectual traditions of his time?
His approach marked a decisive break from the dominant intellectual tradition of scholasticism, which largely relied on philosophical reasoning and, crucially, deference to ancient authorities like Aristotle.
Just believing what the old book said.
Pretty much. Galileo, instead, emphasized rigorous observation of natural phenomena, meticulous experimentation to test hypotheses, and precise mathematical analysis to describe and predict outcomes.
Observation, experiment, math, the trifecta.
Exactly. He insisted that explanations of natural phenomena must be grounded in concrete, verifiable data rather than abstract speculation or just pronouncements from ancient texts.
So he wasn't just doing science, he was defining how science should be done. He kind of provided the operating manual.
That's a great way to put it. His method was crucial for the eventual triumph of scientific thinking over a reliance on pure philosophy or tradition. He transformed science from being primarily a branch of philosophy, where arguments were often won through rhetoric and appeals to authority,
Right.
to a discipline based on empirical evidence, repeatable experiments, and mathematically expressed laws. It's hard to imagine modern science without that monumental shift he championed.
When we talk about Galileo's impact, we absolutely need to dive into his written works, because they were instrumental in disseminating his scientific thought and, importantly, defending the Copernican system. They weren't just reports, they were often arguments designed to persuade.
Oh, absolutely. They were powerful instruments of change. As we discussed, Sidereus Nuncius, or Starry Messenger, published in 1610, was his groundbreaking book detailing all his initial telescopic observations.
Jupiter's moons, the moon's mountains.
Right, the revelations about Jupiter's moons, the moon's rugged surface, and the true composition of the Milky Way, which he correctly identified as countless individual stars. Its impact was both scientific and literary because, as we said, Galileo's clear and accessible style was key to its widespread influence and the sensation it caused across Europe.
But then came the book that truly ignited the firestorm, didn't it? His most contentious work, the one that would lead to his direct confrontation with the Church. Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, published in 1632.
Without a doubt, this was Galileo's most provocative and ultimately consequential work, and he chose to write it in Italian rather than the academic standard Latin.
Oh, Italian, not Latin.
Right, which made it accessible to a much wider educated public beyond just university scholars.
Yeah.
That itself was a bold move.
Sneaky.
It was structured as a dramatic debate among three distinct characters. There was Salviati, who eloquently represented and articulated Galileo's own scientific views, skillfully arguing for the Copernican heliocentric model.
Salviati is Galileo's mouthpiece.
Essentially, yes. Then there was Simplicio, whose name itself, ironically, suggests simple-minded, but was also apparently a nod to a respected 6th century Aristotelian philosopher, Simplicius. Simplicio steadfastly defended the traditional Aristotelian and, by extension, the Ptolemaic Earth-centered views.
Simplicio, the traditionalist.
And finally, Sagredo, who served as a neutral, intelligent Venetian nobleman, essentially the thoughtful layman, summoned for the audience to relate to as they weighed the arguments, asking clarifying questions and expressing educated curiosity.
So it wasn't a dry scientific treatise. It was a captivating philosophical and rhetorical performance, comparing Copernicus's heliocentric model with Ptolemy's geocentric model. And Salviati pretty clearly won the arguments, right?
Oh, that was the clear intention, and it came across loud and clear. By having Salviati so convincingly demolish Simplicio's arguments using observational evidence and mathematical reasoning, the book directly and powerfully supported the Copernican system.
Which didn't go down well.
Not at all. This, of course, drew the immediate and severe ire of the Catholic Church. They saw Simplicio's arguments, which were sometimes presented rather weakly, perhaps even foolishly,
Oh.
as a thinly veiled mockery of the Pope himself, Urban VIII, who had actually been initially somewhat supportive of Galileo but had cautioned him. Some of the Pope's own arguments were put into Simplicio's mouth.
Ooh, bad move.
A very bad move. This book directly led to his infamous trial. But beyond the scientific arguments, it was a philosophical and rhetorical masterpiece, truly showcasing Galileo's persuasive prowess and his understanding of how to use narrative to convey complex ideas.
And even after his trial and sentencing under house arrest, he continued to produce monumental work like Two New Sciences or Discorsi Dimostrazioni Matematiche intorno ad un nuove science, published in 1638.
What's truly remarkable about Two New Sciences is that it was Galileo's last major work, and he managed to write much of it while confined under house arrest, already going blind.
While blind and under house arrest. Incredible.
Yeah, and he even had to smuggle the manuscript out of Italy for publication in Leiden, in the Netherlands, to bypass the church's ban on his writings.
Wow.
It is considered an absolute masterpiece on physics and mechanics, consolidating much of his foundational work on the laws of motion and the strength of materials. In it, he mathematically explained principles such as pendulum motion, the principles of falling bodies, projectile motion, and even the tensile strength of materials, effectively founding the science of material strength and kinematics.
So he essentially published a physics textbook, a foundational work, while under house arrest, unable to openly advocate for the Copernican model anymore. It's a testament to his intellectual resilience and his profound commitment to empirical truth.
Absolutely.
And that brings us, inevitably, to the tragic conflict with the church. The classic clash between scientific observation and established authority.
It's a defining and often, I think, misunderstood moment in history. To grasp the severity of the conflict, we need to recall the context of the era. In the 16th, early 17th centuries, the Catholic Church had essentially adopted Ptolemy's Earth-centered model of the universe as its official cosmological doctrine.
It wasn't just science, it was doctrine.
Right. This wasn't merely a scientific preference. It was deeply intertwined with theological interpretations of sacred texts, which seemed to place Earth, and by extension humanity, at the physical and spiritual center of God's creation.
Like certain Bible passages.
Exactly. Passages like Psalm 93.1, "The world is firmly established, it cannot be moved," or the story in Joshua 10, where Joshua commands the sun and moon to stand still, were interpreted literally by many theologians to support a geocentric, immobile Earth.
And Copernicus's model, the sun-centered one, was seen as directly contrary to that established understanding, not just scientifically, but theologically. A heresy, even.
Precisely. Galileo's telescopic observations and his subsequent writings, particularly the dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, which so strongly supported the Copernican system, were seen as a direct challenge to the Church's authority and its literal interpretation of Scripture. This provoked a strong reaction.
What happened initially?
Initially, back in 1616, the Church's Holy Office investigated the Copernican theory and declared it to be foolish and absurd in philosophy and formally heretical, because it explicitly contradicted Scripture in multiple places.
Formally heretical, strong words.
Very. Galileo was formally warned by Cardinal Bellarmine not to hold, teach, or defend these ideas in any way, orally or in writing. He was told he could discuss it purely as a mathematical hypothesis, a calculation tool, but not as physical reality.
A fine line to walk.
A very fine line.
But as we just discussed, Galileo indirectly violated this ban, or at least its spirit, with dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, which, though written as a debate, clearly championed the heliocentric view as physical reality, and maybe even mocked the Pope's position via Simplicio.
That perceived transgression, that defiance, coupled with shifts in papal leadership, Urban VIII felt personally betrayed, and significant political maneuvering by Galileo's detractors within the church and academia led to severe consequences.
The trial.
Yes, the book was seen as a direct act of defiance against the 1616 injunction. In 1633, Galileo, now nearly 70 years old and in quite ill health, was summoned back to Rome and tried by the Roman Inquisition.
Must have been terrifying.
Undoubtedly. The trial was less about objectively determining scientific truth and much more about asserting ecclesiastical authority and obedience. Under implicit and perhaps explicit threat of torture and excommunication, he was forced to publicly abjure, curse, and detest his errors, meaning his support for the Copernican system. An agonizing moment for any scientist committed to evidence.
To have to deny what you know to be true. And what was the outcome for him, personally?
The outcome was devastating. He was found vehemently suspect of heresy, his dialogue was banned and placed on the index of forbidden books where it remained for centuries, and he was sentenced to indefinite house arrest.
House arrest for life.
Essentially, yes. He spent the remaining 8, nearly 9 years of his life confined to his villa in Arcetri, just outside Florence, until his death in 1642. It was a tragic end for a man who had dedicated his life to uncovering and sharing the truth about the natural world.
This conflict became an incredibly powerful and enduring symbol, didn't it? The tension, the perceived battle between scientific truth and dogmatic authority.
Absolutely. Galileo's unwavering commitment to what his observations and mathematical analyses told him, even when faced with such immense institutional pressure, became a critical turning point, symbolically at least.
Even though he recanted under duress.
Yes, even though he was forced to recant publicly. His individual stance became an enduring inspiration for future generations of scientists, embodying the struggle for intellectual freedom and the defense of scientific truth against entrenched authority, whether religious or secular. It set a powerful precedent for the courage required to advance knowledge, highlighting the fundamental importance of intellectual freedom in the pursuit of scientific understanding.
So, if we take a deep dive now into his enduring contributions and long-term impact, it's clear his legacy profoundly shaped the development of scientific thought and modern science itself, extending far beyond specific inventions to establishing the very scientific method and critical thinking.
His revolution in astronomy is perhaps his most visible immediate impact. His telescopic observations fundamentally changed our understanding of the universe's structure, permanently.
No going back after that.
Pretty much. Discoveries like Jupiter's moons orbiting another body besides Earth and the phases of Venus demonstrating its clear orbit around the Sun were decisive proofs of the Copernican system's accuracy. They didn't just suggest the heliocentric model was better, they empirically debunked key aspects of the geocentric model beyond reasonable doubt, moving astronomy firmly from philosophical speculation towards a data-driven science.
And this was a key step, wasn't it? Crucial for astronomy's evolution into a truly modern scientific discipline, moving it from just descriptive stargazing to an empirical mathematical science.
Indeed. But his influence on the foundations of physics is equally monumental, maybe even more pervasive. His meticulous work on the laws of motion and the principle of inertia laid the essential conceptual groundwork for Isaac Newton's monumental laws of physics, which would be codified decades later in the Principia Mathematica.
Newton stood on the shoulders of giants, as he said, and Galileo is definitely one of them.
Absolutely. Galileo's experimental and mathematical approach fundamentally transformed physics into a quantitative science, demonstrating that natural phenomena could be described and predicted with mathematical precision. This paved the way for the golden age of classical mechanics.
And there were incredibly practical applications, too, stemming from his physics work. His work on pendulum motion, for instance, directly advanced clock technology, which then led to major improvements in navigation and time measurement. It wasn't just theoretical, it had real-world impact.
That's the beauty of it, the blend of pure inquiry and tangible benefit. The vastly improved accuracy of pendulum clocks, building directly on Galileo's insights about isochronism, was a game-changer, especially for seafaring nations.
How so?
Well, prior to reliable clocks, estimating longitude at sea was incredibly difficult and dangerous, leading to countless shipwrecks and navigational errors. With accurate clocks, sailors could precisely track the time difference between their current location and a known meridian like Greenwich, enabling much safer and more efficient long-distance trade and exploration.
So better clocks meant better maps and safer voyages.
Exactly. Huge economic and geopolitical consequences.
And perhaps his most profound legacy underpinning all of this is his contribution to the modern scientific method. He essentially provided the operating manual for how science should be done, moving it away from just speculation and argument.
Absolutely. His insistence on systematic observation, controlled experimentation, and rigorous mathematical analysis became the bedrock of modern science. He shifted the paradigm from simply arguing about how the world ought to be based on ancient texts or philosophical reasoning.
Like the scholastics did.
Right. To discovering how the world actually is, based on verifiable evidence and repeatable results. This shift was monumental for the progress of all scientific fields that followed. His conflict with the church, while tragic for him personally, ended up underscoring the fundamental importance of scientific freedom and critical thought, setting a precedent that still resonates deeply today.
And that brings us to the brave legacy of Galileo. His courage, even when facing the Inquisition and forced to recant, initiated a kind of tradition, or at least became a potent symbol for scientists defending empirical truth against entrenched authority. It's a powerful message that echoes even today, doesn't it?
It really does. What's truly compelling here is how his specific discoveries had these long-term ripple effects, propagating through centuries of scientific advancement, each building upon his foundational insights in ways he couldn't have possibly imagined.
Like dominoes falling.
Exactly. Take a telescope. His initial improvements weren't the end, but just the beginning. It became the fundamental tool for astronomical observation, constantly refined and amplified. His work directly inspired later astronomers like Christian Huygens, who discovered Saturn's moon Titan, and William Herschel, who used ever more powerful telescopes to discover Uranus and its moons in the 18th century.
Leading eventually to?
Leading eventually to our modern behemoths like the Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb Space Telescope, which are continuously pushing the boundaries of our cosmic understanding. You can trace a direct snowball effect from that first curious glance through Galileo's crude lenses.
Amazing lineage. And his laws of motion, the stuff he worked on during house arrest, weren't just academic exercises locked away in a book, were they?
No, not at all. They form the very foundation for classical mechanics. Isaac Newton, as we mentioned, building directly on Galileo's insights into inertia, acceleration, and falling bodies, systematically codified these laws in his Principia Mathematica.
And these laws are still used.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
These principles are not just historical curiosities. They are still applied every day in everything from civil engineering, like designing stable buildings and bridges that withstand forces correctly, to the incredibly complex intricacies of space travel.
Space travel, how so?
Well, the calculations for launching rockets, for navigating spacecraft across millions of miles, for predicting orbital mechanics to get probes to Mars or Jupiter, all fundamentally rely on the laws of motion and gravity that trace their origins right back to Galileo's pioneering quantitative work on kinematics.
Incredible. From rolling balls down ramps to launching rockets.
It's a direct line.
And that pendulum motion, a seemingly simple observation in a church, also had huge practical applications beyond just telling time, didn't it?
It absolutely did. As we touched on, his work on the isochronism of the pendulum inspired Christian Huygens to invent the practical pendulum clock in 1656. This invention revolutionized timekeeping by dramatically increasing its accuracy by orders of magnitude.
Right, the key to longitude.
Exactly. This, in turn, was critical for marine navigation. For the first time, sailors had a reliable way to calculate longitude at sea, vastly improving the safety and efficiency of long-distance voyages. This enabled unprecedented global trade and exploration, essentially shrinking the world by making distant lands reliably accessible. It beautifully demonstrates how a seemingly abstract scientific discovery can have profound and world-changing practical applications.
So his ripple effects are still influencing us today, permeating nearly every aspect of modern life, science, and technology, even if we don't always connect the dots directly back to him. Galileo remains an enduring symbol of scientific thought, critical inquiry, and free investigation.
And fittingly, maybe somewhat belatedly, in 1992, after a lengthy commission initiated by Pope John Paul II, the Catholic Church formally acknowledged its error in the condemnation of Galileo.
They admitted they were wrong.
Yes, they acknowledged the errors made by the theological judges in the 17th century and officially recognized his immense scientific contributions. This was a significant moment, seen by many as a symbolic resolution, or at least an important step, in healing that long-standing historical tension between science and certain interpretations of religion, acknowledging the distinct domains and methodologies of scientific inquiry and theological belief.
And his works absolutely pioneered the scientific revolution, didn't they? Fueling that intellectual awakening of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment that followed. But his most visible, maybe visceral impact might be how his telescope ignited humanity's curiosity about the universe, fundamentally reshaping our perspective from being Earth-centered to being, well, cosmic.
Absolutely. That curiosity, sparked by seeing the heavens with new eyes, seeing mountains on the moon, moons around Jupiter, spots on the sun, continues to this very day. It fuels our modern space telescopes like Hubble and James Webb, and all the deep space research that constantly pushes the boundaries of our cosmic understanding. It really is a direct lineage from that first look through Galileo's crude telescope, inspiring generations to ask, what else is out there? What more can we learn?
And we even have modern tributes showing his lasting impact in the most direct ways imaginable.
That's right. For example, NASA's Galileo spacecraft, launched back in 1989, which orbited and studied Jupiter and its moons for many years,
I remember that mission.
was a direct and intentional tribute to his initial discoveries of those very moons almost 4 centuries earlier. Its mission profoundly expanded our understanding of the Jovian system, volcanoes on Io, potential oceans on Europa, fulfilling the promise of Galileo's first telescopic glimpse in ways he couldn't have dreamed of. It's a powerful testament, isn't it, to how profoundly one individual's insights, courage, and persistence can shape not just specific scientific fields, but humanity's entire outlook on its place in the universe, inspiring exploration that continues centuries later.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it's just so clear that Galileo was not just a brilliant scientist, though he was certainly that, but a true visionary and a profoundly courageous thinker.
Mhm.
His telescope opened a new window to the sky, allowing us to see the universe in a way no one had before. His laws of motion helped us decode the mathematical language of nature itself, laying the groundwork for how we understand physical reality even now.
Yeah, absolutely foundational.
And his conflict with the church. It highlighted both the immense personal cost and the invaluable worth of pursuing truth, observational truth, no matter the obstacles. His story is a true turning point in humanity's journey to understand the universe.
His legacy really encourages us, I think, to consider the enduring power of questioning assumptions, even deeply held ones, especially ones based on authority rather than evidence.
Good point.
It reminds us how one individual's courage, combined with intellectual rigor and a steadfast commitment to empirical evidence, can profoundly impact how humanity perceives its place in the vast cosmos.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to ponder. What secrets of the universe, or maybe even truths about ourselves or our society, are we still too afraid to uncover, just as Galileo challenged the perceived certainties of his time? Think about that for a while.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Galileo.
We hope you feel a little bit more well-informed and, dare we say, a lot more curious about the universe and the history of science. We'll see you next time for more shortcuts to being well-informed.